the fila.
I'll never be alone.
The Crow is a 2024 gothic superhero thriller. Directed by Rupert Sanders, it serves as a reboot and the fifth in the franchise. It's adapted from the 1989 comic book series by James Barr. It stars Bill Skarsgård, FKA Twigs, and Danny Houston. Soulmates Eric and Shelley are brutally murdered, so given a chance to save the love of his life, Eric must sacrifice himself and traverse the worlds of the living and the dead, seeking revenge.
You were given the power of a god.
So I just got back from the theaters checking out the latest version of The Crow, the reboot, this 2024 version of it. And just for context, I love the original one. I am such a big fan of that movie. It had a big spot in my life growing up. I'm of the perfect age that when that movie came out, I loved the soundtrack, I loved the style, everything about it. I got swept up in it. The fact that it's gothic-y and metal, but it's also superhero. It was a perfect combination for young me. And I was able to rewatch it in theaters just a few months back. They did a special screening near me and I checked it out. And so coming into this, I have it still fresh in my mind. And you can't compare the two. They're just not the same movie. They're dramatically different in just about every way you can be different. The only thing they really have in common is the basic setup. And I mean the very basic setup and the names of the characters, because the way things play out feels super different. I mean, it just does. And so I really have to set aside my fandom for that original film and not compare these two, because if I do, there is no chance in hell that I'm gonna enjoy on any level this latest version. On top of that, going into this, I heard nothing but bad things about it. I'm not a big fan of the look, at least from the trailers, like the style of it. I'm just kind of like, it looks kind of cheesy. It looks a little bit Hot Topic, or not a little bit, a lot of it Hot Topic. Like it just doesn't, it didn't grab me. Let's just put it that way. But I wanted to give it a chance. So I still went into this with as open of a mind as I could have. And to be honest, it's not horrible, okay? You're going to hear a lot of people saying and acting like it's the worst movie ever made. And I'm not exactly sure why that is, because I've already seen a few, so I know it's coming. But I'm not exactly sure. Like I said, I think their fandom for the original is probably part of it. And there are issues with this. I'm going to get into some of those, but I just don't think it's horrible. I've definitely seen worse movies this year. But one of its biggest crimes for me is it's slow. It really is. I was bored. Because that original movie is basically an action comic book kind of movie. And this isn't really that. This is much more slow and prodding and moody. And that was the thing that really, I think the worst downfall for me was that one, it's unremarkable. And two, it's slow and kind of boring. And those are pretty bad things to have in your movie. But the bright spots are the acting. Everybody in it, I thought, did a really great job, and especially with what they're working with. And yes, the characters are very cringe. Everything about this feels super try hard. It feels like people that are out of touch of what is actually cool, trying to make a movie that they think is hip and modern and what the kids want to see now. It's so bizarre in that regard. So there's definitely problems with that as well. But with what they're given, I think FKA Twigs and Bill Skarsgård especially both do a really good job in this. They feel like they're actually in love. I mean, their romance comes on a little bit too quick. It feels a little bit, like all of a sudden they're just these soulmates. But it wasn't the worst. I mean, I've definitely seen romances come together faster and feel less believable than this, especially like I said, because these two really do act their asses off, for a lack of a better word. I'm just not a big fan of the choices of the characters, because they feel kind of scummy. They feel like kind of dirtbags, especially in the setup. You're just like, I don't really like these people that much. Like, they don't feel like the greatest people, and I'm supposed to be rooting for them. But then as things unfold and you do get into the story more, you do realize that, yeah, they're rough around the edges. Yeah, they're a little bit dirty, dirtbaggish, but they really are good people. And I think a lot of that is just the likability, especially of Bill Skarsgård. Like, it's hard to watch him on screen and not enjoy his performances and his characters because he just commits so much to every role I've ever seen him in. And then the violence is another bright spot for me, even though the gore, it's like every time I think of a positive, I also think of a negative to go with it. So it's like the violence is pretty good when you get it, but there isn't very much. Surprisingly, like, not a ton of action and violence in this like you expect there to be. There's really only a couple scenes where like stuff really goes down, but when it does get violent, it is cool. I mean, he is a badass and does kick some serious ass, but it's mostly just this one climactic scene where the vast majority of that happens. So the rest of the movie, you're not getting the action. So if you're going into this expecting there to be action and violence and gore and all that, you're probably going to be disappointed. On top of that, the gore that there is, they use a lot of CGI blood, and it may just be a pet peeve of mine. The majority of people probably don't mind it much, but for me, CGI blood takes me out of it every time. It just takes the weight away immediately. I mean, he has this sword and he goes whack it like into someone's neck or whatever, and the blood that goes splashing out is obviously CGI. It takes that out. It just doesn't feel as ferocious and brutal. So, you know, there was definitely some drawbacks for that element as well. But I did enjoy some of the elements here and some of the decisions that were made, especially when it comes to Eric Draven's sacrifice and what he has to do, and then how he goes about getting his powers. It is drawn out. It does take way too long to happen, but it is pretty cool, the idea of it and what they do. It's just like a lot of the things in this, it's the execution that really doesn't work. Like, a lot of the ideas could be cool, but those ideas, for the most part, are just taken from the comic book. So the directing and the screenplay are probably, I guess, what's really holding this back, if you really think about it. But I did like the moody atmosphere, the overall look of this for the most part. But once again, there is way too much CGI, way too many scenes that feel very green screen. And it's not a good thing to be compared to because of how old this movie is. But it reminded me in a lot of ways of the Spawn movie. And people laugh and make fun of the CGI and the green screen elements and stuff from that movie. Like, especially this one place that's kind of a purgatory-ish place that Eric goes to find out about his powers and what he needs to do and all that stuff. It's kind of a purgatory-ish type of place. And I know they're trying to give it this mystical, you know, fantasy, other world, other reality feel, but it just felt very heavily green screen. There's these crows flying around everywhere, and it just felt so not real, and it really took me out of the movie again, because it's one thing for something to feel fantastical and otherworldly, but it's another when it just feels like straight up CGI, and it's like almost like you can literally see it being projected on a screen. Like, just, yeah, it's a frustrating feeling. And there was a lot of scenes like that, too many scenes like that. Another problem I personally had with this is the big climactic scene where he's just laying waste to a whole bunch of bad guys. It all takes place in this opera house, and you're basically seeing as much of the opera happening as you are the fight and him attacking, you know, and beating up on these bad guys. And it's like, I don't know. I think they thought that it was this real artsy, epic thing, but in reality, at least for me anyway, it just really took away from what was happening. And there wasn't great stakes either. I mean, you didn't really ever feel like Eric was in jeopardy in this. There was never anybody who felt like the big bad guy that he couldn't beat, or it just felt like he's just methodically going and killing people one by one, and that's that. You know, there wasn't any stakes. It really didn't feel like there was any weight at all, or worry that he was gonna fail at his mission or any of that. And that's a big problem for a movie. It's like, if you don't have stakes, I mean, you know, it's hard to stay super engaged. So yeah, obviously this movie's got issues, but I think as a whole, it's still entertaining enough. It's still decent enough. It's not unwatchable. And like I said, it's definitely not the worst movie I've seen. But if you try to compare it to the original Crow, I think that's probably its biggest sin, is the fact that it is called The Crow, and it is gonna be compared to that original movie that I think still really holds up to this day and does so many things right that this doesn't do right.
You have no idea what hell awaits you. No, I do.
So that's my 2 cents, but that's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for checking this out. I want to give a huge, massive, enormous thank you to the Ghost Pirate crew, to you guys over on Patreon, and to the channel members over here. You guys mean so much to me. And if you would like to find out how you can help support this channel over on Patreon, there's a link down in the description. Or you can become a channel member and help support the channel that way by clicking on the join button down there. But like always, thank you so much for watching. Please crush that like button. And remember, guys, horror can be fun. And if you enjoyed this, click right here to watch me talk about Stream. And I'll see you guys next time.